Hello everyone, and welcome to the third OASPA webinar in the Open Science series. Today we're celebrating Academic-Led Publishing Day, which is the various events taking place all over the world to do this. And we're really lucky to have three experts who know all about the Academy taking on publishing. And I'm not going to spend too much time either introducing them or what they do, because I think it will become very apparent about their expertise. But yes, it's Paul Ayris from UCL Library Services, who was also past president of LERU and is going to talk to us about both UCL and the European scene, and Charles Watkinson, who was at Purdue and now at University of Michigan Press, and he's going to probably focus more on the US side. And then we've got Kathleen Shearer, who's the Executive Director of COAR, who can give us a global view and where this is heading. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and thank you to Copyright Clearance Center, and over to Paul.
Thanks very much, Catriona, and welcome everyone who's joined the webinar today. I'm going to talk about the UCL Press approach as representative of a European approach to alternative publishing platforms, which will deliver a fully open access world as quickly as is feasible. I'm having trouble with the slides, Catriona. I'm sorry. It's working now. Okay. Thanks for this. So let me explain what it is I mean by academic-led publishing. I think it is based in and led by the Academy. It can be a university press and UCL Press, alongside other presses in Europe, are good examples of born open access university presses. UCL Press is the first UK fully open access university press. So it can either be a university press or it can be an academic publishing venture led by academic activity. And there are examples of this around Europe where academics in faculties or collaborations band together to maintain a publishing platform. I wouldn't say that green open access dissemination is itself publishing, so I'm not including that in the academic publishing band. For academic-led publishing to be a viable option, it has to be aligned with professional principles, and I give you the example of COAR as publication ethics, and UCL Press, for one, is certainly aligned with COAR. But what the defining feature of a university press is that it embraces the mission and the values of the university. And so this is our UCL Press mission, and it is characteristic of a university press statement for any open access university press in Europe. Scholarly outputs are typically subjected to a publication process that encourages widespread dissemination. The university press is committed to being a force for good and enlightenment in the world. We are a generous partner, and we always expect to be a net provider, so that it isn't money and profit that drives the press. What is a common feature of European open access press publishing is that we are committed to adding value rather than making money. If you were to talk to your university rectorate, to senior managers in the university, and you were to say, well, what are the advantages? Why should we do this? I'm showing here on the screen the arguments that I put to my senior managers here in UCL in London about why we should start a university press. And these are all the benefits that I could identify as to why UCL Press should be founded and why UCL, as one of the major European research-led organizations that didn't have its own publishing activity, should have it. And the most important reason in this pack was that the argument that captured most attention was the one in the middle, the global impact that university press publishing in open access has for the reputation of the university and the reputations of researchers who are publishing with us. So our global engagement strategy was the main driver, actually, in terms of the reasons that the university wanted to identify for investing in this activity. It was the impact that the outputs would make across the world that led the university to say, yes, we will fund you. So as an exemplar of an alternative publishing platform in Europe, these are the kinds of results and developments that we have experienced in the 3 years of activity since we were founded in 2015. All our staff are professional publishers. They come to us from the commercial publishing environment. So although the press is based in the library, and I'm, as university librarian, the chief executive of the press, the staff that we employ are not librarians, because I didn't think that librarians by themselves brought the right skills and experience to the table. We wanted to compete with commercial publishing platforms on their own terms. And so all our staff, we have about 10 staff in the press now, all the managers in the press do have commercial publishing backgrounds. And this picture wall here is an example of all the books, so the research monographs that we published, because the first category of material that the press started to publish was research monographs. Why did we choose research monographs? It's because when we looked across Europe and we looked at gaps in the publishing market, I thought it was research monographs that was the easiest of all the areas to tackle. The commercial sales of research monographs is worryingly small. It's a very niche market. If you were to get 200 sales of a research monograph across the bookshop counter, that would be a good result. But it's a very small market, and it's a very niche area. So the margins are extremely tight. As you'll see when I come on to show some statistics, I think the UCL Press model for open access monograph publishing has transformed the landscape as far as research monographs are concerned. We also publish textbooks, and this is one of our first textbooks. It comes from the MA in Burns and Plastic Surgery at one of our teaching hospitals here in UCL, and Deepak, author of the contributing author of the text, when I asked him, well, why did he want to publish this with us? Why would European academics and medics like yourself with an academic and health service contract, why would you want to publish in open access? You could have published this book with any commercial publisher anywhere in the world. And he said, well, there are two reasons that I chose UCL Press. The first is that it's an open access press, and I wanted the insights from our innovative surgery techniques that we've developed at the Royal Free to be available to developing countries all around the world, so that they can use the clinical interventions that we're advocating in their surgical practice. And the best way of doing that is to remove the cost barrier that commercial publication brings, because they wouldn't be able to afford the material that we're making available. So for Deepak, open access was a no-brainer. As a result, we've had fantastic success with Downloaded now, perhaps one of the most successful of all European open access presses, actually, university presses. We're Downloaded in 229 countries across the world, 15 downloads in North Korea. The only contact that my university has with North Korea is actually the publishing output from UCL Press. and actually one download in Vatican City too. So His Holiness must be reading something. I'm not absolutely sure what, but I'll check the logs to find out. We're close now to 2 million downloads. We get about 100,000 downloads a month from for UCL Press titles, and obviously that figure will increase the more material we publish. We publish journals as well. So journals, I thought, was not a quick win for European open access publishers because commercial competition is just so intense. So that wasn't the place that I wanted to start. But we do publish journals. These are 8 journals that we currently publish. They're open access journals, but otherwise follow a rather conventional publishing format with peer review and digital delivery. But the most exciting news, and what I think is a game changer for European presses, we are the first, certainly the first European open access university press that I know of to have launched a mega journal platform. And this is our mega journal workflow. We launched the platform on the 31st of January, and we have just yesterday received our first submission of a paper that will go through a peer review on the platform. So we're launching this in a broad thematic area of environmental studies. The outputs will be open access on day 1 as a green open access preprint in an open access repository. There will be open peer review, and we will see the text of the peer reviews and the identity of the peer reviewers as part of the process. And once it gets a green light from 2 reviewers, we'll publish the article on the platform as an open access output. How are we going to make this a European model? How can other universities follow the success, I think, that our approach has to open access publishing? I think there are 2 ways. You can either establish all the infrastructure yourself and accept that there will be a cost involved in employing staff and developing the technical infrastructure that UCL Press has developed to deliver this. Or you can buy publishing services from us, because we offer a white label publishing service to other universities or learner societies who want to brand their own publishing with their own name, but don't want to invest in the infrastructure that is required in order to deliver it. So in that case, you can buy our publishing services on a fixed fee per year, and we will offer publishing services branded as your own institution, but with UCL Press at the engine in the background doing all the publishing. So this is the model for European publishing, fully Plan S compliant. Plan S identifies 3 platforms for complying with open access requirements. Alternative publishing systems like UCL Press is fully Plan S compliant, and we want to develop our services in all these areas, but particularly to develop the mega journal to see whether it is, as a thematic, institutional-based publishing platform, a real competitor to commercial journals and to the commercial publishing system that we in UCL want to move away from. So Catriona, I think that is my contribution. Very happy to hear questions and to hear colleagues and their contributions to the webinar.
Charles.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Paul. That was very useful. And Casey, I think you're about to bring up my slides.
Yep, Charles, if you advance it to the next one, it should be your first slide.
Oh, perfect. Look at the efficiency there. There we go. Perfect. So thank you very much for the invitation to be on this call. And I'm going to talk a little bit from a North American perspective, but not in a very comprehensive way, just to share some observations from my perspective. Sorry, there we go. So I just wanted to explain what that perspective is. So first of all, I'm a university press director. I'm director of University of Michigan Press, and it's a book publisher, publishes about 100 books a year, mostly monographs in humanities and social sciences. And that's the perspective I bring really from the humanities and social sciences. We publish some other books as well. We're one of over 100 North American university presses represented by the Association of University Presses. And we recently launched our own ebook collection, University of Michigan Press ebook collection, imaginatively named, in order to sell our books to libraries and also to host the sort of enriched media book, the interactive scholarly works that our authors are particularly asking for now. So there's an example in this slide of an interactive scholarly work, an archaeological report enriched with a 3D model and with links to the data and to media, etc. And we are able to do this because we have our own publishing platform, Fulcrum, supported by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. And our particular focus as a publisher is on areas where these enhanced works are particularly popular, like performing arts or archaeology. So anyhow, so that's University of Michigan Press. And of course, I've included a link at the bottom there to anybody who might be interested in acquiring our ebook collection. Couldn't resist. So the second thing is we're a library publisher. So Michigan Publishing Services is a publisher not only of books that come from our own faculty, staff, and students at University of Michigan, but increasingly of other publishers who are looking for white labeled services. So just as Paul said for UCL Press, we're providing those services and have been for a while to other journals and to other book collections and to other publishers in general. We publish around 30 open access journals, 20 open access books a year, and other digital projects through Michigan Publishing Services. And we also run the Deep Blue Institutional Repository, which has a lot of digital objects in it. It has a lot of downloads. It's one of the most used digital repositories out there, and recently launched a data repository. So again, this is just to say where we're coming from. We're a member in this context of the Library Publishing Coalition, which is an extremely important player in this landscape, and which I'm going to reference several times as we move on. So that has about 60 members, and its directory lists almost 120 different libraries engaged in publishing activities. And then finally, and I never expected to be in this position, but I'm representing a publishing technology provider. So this Fulcrum platform and our legacy platform, Digital Library Extension Service, DLXS, are platforms that are used by us and by other publishers for quite a lot of content now. So over 6,000 ebooks, 600 articles per year are being produced through our publishing services, over 1 million active users, 20 non-University of Michigan clients. 600 articles a year, that's like a joke to a medical publisher, but it's quite a lot for a publisher of small humanities journals. So this is open source software, Fulcrum. We provide services and infrastructure, and we have 4 design principles: accessibility, durability, discoverability, and flexibility or interoperability. And of course, here's the commercial partner with us bit, but I'm going to refer back to Fulcrum quite a bit. So are we an academic-led publisher? So this is, I think, an interesting question today, and it's become a slightly controversial question in the context of this particular day that we're celebrating. And I would point you, if you haven't seen it, to a really good blog post released by Melanie Schlosser and Catherine Mitchell at the Library Publishing Coalition today, so at librarypublishing.org, where they ask, academy-owned, academy-led, community-led, what's at stake in the words we use to describe new publishing paradigms? And, you know, it's a really good question, but they conclude, there's no question we're facing significant challenges and opportunities as the traditional publishing model begins to falter. How the Academy positions itself at this point will have consequences for years to come. Our muddled terms are a clear indicator of the complexity we face in imagining a future for scholarly communication with new roles and responsibilities for researchers and institutions. Coming to a shared understanding of the implications of the words we use is an important first step towards this future. So I've listed here, and maybe in a slightly trivial sort of way, you know, potato, potato. Is academic-led, is academy-led, is it very different, or is it a matter of defining difference in order to get resources? What's happening here? So, you know, if you look down academic-led, I think many of the ways in which the Radical OA Collective, for example, is thinking about what that term means are very similar to those that I think about in terms of academy-led. Perhaps a slight difference towards how we perceive the current system, a very definite effort on the academic-led front to disrupt and reinvent the system, certainly through the Radical OA Collective, and perhaps a more gradualist approach, which is based on the idea that there's an ecology that includes for-profit colleagues, actually has much of worth that we want to preserve in it. So what is the fundamental thing that we're trying to get at with all these different terms? I think it really is about being mission-driven, a recommitment to the idea that, you know, we are non-profit publishers, so we're mission-driven publishers. What does that actually mean? And to me, in the humanities especially, it's about being much more explicit about values and understanding what we mean by values and taking a values-first approach. And here I wanted to refer to the Humetrics HSS initiative with the link at the bottom, which has done a really amazing job over the last few years of really trying to articulate what are the values that are of real benefit, what are the values that come from within the humanistic community? And so this is an initiative that's developed these 5 values: quality, equity, openness, collegiality, and community, and has worked to refine those in conversations and talk about their applications in different contexts. They're well worth thinking about. And I want to spend the remainder of the talk talking about how these manifest for me and for my organization. So quality. Quality has often been talked about in terms of peer review, and that peer review conversation has often lived primarily in the sciences and in medicine. So I think, you know, the idea of peer review in the humanities can be a little bit different. We are primarily a book publisher, and the way in which peer review operates for us, it's compensated in quotes because of the fact that you know, we're never going to be able to pay enough to really compensate the faculty members who do reviews. They do so much work on those, but at least we pay something. And we have a number of different protocols, a number of different approaches to peer review, which are really being explored at the moment by the Peer Review Transparency Initiative, and I've included a link at the bottom. So what I'm showing in this image is one of the publications from the Lever Press, which is a publisher that Michigan supports, provides infrastructure for. And Lever Press has decided to use these icons on its publications to indicate in some detail what we mean by peer review in particular cases. So this is about being clear about what the quality addition of peer review was and being transparent about that. And the other thing I would say in book publishing in the humanities, that we mustn't forget the acquisitions editor. And I've just got a message yesterday forwarded to me from one of my acquisitions editor colleagues. And I put it down here. Thank you for the care and diligence you've already committed. I was thrilled by the peer reviews, but I'm also energized and recommitted to writing a book that reaches a wide audience. So the acquisitions editor is playing a very important role here in distilling the peer review message, working with the author, etc. So the acquisitions editors are very important. And this is a slightly controversial slide. I think some of my commercial colleagues will disagree with this. It's probably not fair to sort of take a broad brush approach for university presses even. But the workflow on the right is the way I think of commercial colleagues operating. The author submits a proposal. The acquisitions editor, who may have a target of 55 to 65 books to acquire per year, sends it to review. This is the proposal for review. They may use two, but often one reviewer. The acquisitions editor gives feedback and a decision to the author, and the book is contracted. Over in the blue is our workflow as a university press. The author submits a book proposal. The acquisitions editor has a target of 20 to 25 books a year, so they can have the time to spend with the author to develop that work. It goes out for 2 single-blind peer reviews, comes back to the acquisitions editor, who gives feedback to the author. The author submits the full manuscript. It goes to the acquisition editor. The acquisition editor gives feedback. There are 2 more peer reviews. It then goes to a faculty editorial board, which is an executive board at University of Michigan. It's the one that makes a decision. So it's an academic-led activity, and that is the group who then discusses again. There may be another feedback loop, and finally the book is contracted. So you can see that there are all these extra steps in an academy-led publishing model, and of course those add expense, and university presses have been criticized for having very high levels of expense for their books. But actually, if you look at the breakdown of our expenses, almost 50% of the expense of a book lies in our acquisitions function. And if you look beyond the acquisitions function, production-type functions are relatively similar across sectors. So I think it's worth noting. Equity and openness. Gold open access has some issues. Of course, gold is not always BPC or APC funded, but it often is. And the issue of equity in a gold open access environment is questionable. It's a problem. So if we insist that authors pay, doesn't that disenfranchise a whole new group of authors? The dream, the idea of platinum diamond open access is really something that I think we should continue to pursue. And some very good examples exist of publishers who don't need to charge their authors for open access. Lever Press being a notable example, where that group will never accept money from authors or their institutions to publish. It's entirely funded by the institutions, the 54 liberal arts colleges who support the initiative. And then the other part of equity and openness, I think, is transparency, candor, accountability, and how we demonstrate that in our work, and we think continuously about how we could strive to do this better, is that we try and be humble. I think humility is important here. When we think about issues around accessibility or preservation in these enhanced ebook environments and these interactive scholarly works, we don't know the answer, and we need to be very, very honest that we're doing the best we can, and here's what we're not able to do, here's what we are able to do. So Fulcrum, which is our platform again, we have very clear accessibility and preservation statements at the bottom, which are regularly updated and agonized over. Lastly, collegiality and community. So this is a rather busy sort of picture, but what it shows is it shows the way in which our investment in Fulcrum is also an investment in other open source infrastructure providers. And what we're trying to do is create a complete workflow that actually can rely on open source tools for all our work. And by doing so, we rise together because we invest back into tools like Editoria from CDL, UC Press, COCO. We pay money back to Editoria for those production services. And we'll similarly pay money to Clocks or to Portico for preservation services. And we all rise together in this kind of environment. And we're getting that money through selling things like the University of Michigan Press ebook collection and services to other publishers. The other thing about this diagram is the red boxes indicate the important role that commercial partners are playing in discovery, authentication, in metrics, and that's an important relationship, and we mustn't forget or mustn't dismiss our colleagues in that world. I think it's a huge mistake. And then another part of this community collegiality is the initiatives that libraries especially are launching, combining together to provide these rich networks of support and community, as well as in some cases finances. But what's interesting is the overlap between these different groups is huge, and if I was to guess, I would say that fewer than 250 North American institutions seem to actually be picking up the bill for everything. So there are a huge number of institutions who are effectively free riding on our system, and more of them need to come into the pool. So I've come to the end of my time. I've included a link here to the presentation as well, but thank you. And now I'm going to pass over to Kathleen.
Via me, thanks so much, Charles. And so I think those are both fantastic talks. I just wanted to remind the audience that do keep putting in your questions. We're getting some great questions from South America and the US and all over, and we've got 150 participants. But we're going to have the discussion at the end. So we'll have Kathleen's talk, and then we'll probably have about 10 to 15 minutes discussion. I know people have to leave on the hour, but we may go over depending on a little bit. Depending on the questions. Okay, Kathleen, over to you. The other point I wanted to notice is it's really interesting, the slightly different focus between the US and Europe in terms of the sort of willingness to engage with commercial players. And I think that's a really big debate at the moment. And I also just wanted to say that Paul isn't sitting in front of his camera because he can't at the moment. We have issues with the camera, so you get to see his office at UCL. But anyway, Kathleen, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm just waiting for my slides to be loaded, but I'd like to thank
They're
Paul.
all set, Kathleen. If you just advance the slide to the next one, you should be good to go.
Thanks. Great. Yeah, well, thanks both to Paul and Charles for your interesting presentations, and also thanks for the invitation to be here. Just very briefly, I'm the Executive Director of COAR, which is the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, and we are an international organization. We have about 140 members from around the world in over 40 countries on all 5 continents. So we're quite an international organization, and we represent kind of the repository community writ large. And I guess I'd like to start my presentation with the premise that we maybe have been focusing a lot on openness and trying to ensure that we move from subscription access to open access, but we're starting to realize now that actually open is not enough. And we need to develop an ecosystem, a scholarly communication system that's more than just open, a system that's sustainable, more equal, and is also open to innovation. So in the international community, there's a lot of discussion about the Sustainable Development Goals, and I think it's widely recognized that research and the widespread dissemination of research results and outputs really contribute strongly to all of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But I think one of the things we need to start talking about in our community, and is very relevant for the Academy-owned conversation, is the system for sharing and disseminating research must also be sustainable. So just some context to my further conclusions that I'll make at the end of my presentation. I think there's two aspects to research that we really need to support as we develop this new, more sustainable system. The first is that science is global, and I think our current system supports that fairly well. We have a lot of large international journals that are available, more or less, to researchers around the world, with the exception of those researchers who can't afford to pay for access. This is a map of the GIANT the GIANT NREN network, and it shows you the connections across the world, and these connections are there because researchers are collaborating across the world in many different ways. And so the scholarly communication system really needs to support that global aspect of science and research. But I think also really important, and we need to keep this in mind, is that science is also local, or research is also local. Just to give you a couple of examples here, in Nepal, they do a lot of research on mountain sickness, which is very important for them, obviously, because they live at very high altitudes. In the south, they're concerned with diseases such as Chagas that are very common in warm countries in the south, but may not be of interest to the northern climates. I'll give you a Canadian example where I'm based. We're going through a whole reconciliation process in Canada with our native communities, and that's very important for our society right now. So all of these issues, every country has their own issue, every region has their own important problems, and these are very important in terms of the kind of research that our governments are funding. So again, we need to support the global and the local environment. And the current situation is that the system is quite imbalanced. I said the global aspect of the system is supported, but again, that's only for countries that can afford to pay. And on the other hand, there's a misalignment of publishing incentives in many countries, and that they don't really support publishing around local research priorities. So for many researchers in many countries, including developing countries, they're assessed based on their ability to publish in international journals with high impact factor. Yet the kind of problems that might be most important for those countries may be local problems and not of interest for international editorial boards. So many researchers are caught in this catch-22. So I guess from COAR's perspective, we've been thinking about how we can support, how we can create a system that supports both local and global characteristics. And one of the things that we're proposing is to strengthen institutional services, but ensure that those services are interoperable internationally. And I'd like to point you to a report by MIT Libraries that talks about the future of libraries, and basically talks about how libraries need to strengthen their roles around supporting and providing access to locally produced content. But of course, those libraries need to be interoperable. We don't want to have every institution as a silo. So one of the visions that we're putting forward at COAR is that we use the very strong and large network of institutional repositories around the world to scale things up, and therefore position repositories kind of as the foundation of the scholarly communication system, and try to build value-added services on top of those repositories. And this is the challenge and the vision that we're trying to move forward. But this vision really requires kind of an unbundling of the scholarly journal functions. So what we're proposing is that repositories or institutions take on the function of archiving, certification, awareness registration, and then, well, I guess the certification is more the peer review. And then we build these kind of social layers on top, which would include the peer review and other types of assessment based on whatever the needs are of those particular communities. So this is an image created by one of the members of the COAR Next Generation Repositories Working Group. And it just kind of presents to you the way we're looking at the role of repositories in the future and how they might be able to support this vision. So currently right now, repositories are somewhat siloed, and the way they are interoperable is through common metadata standards, which are harvested through networks. And what we'd like to do is change the technologies and the way that the community is thinking about repositories to make them open and the resources more open so that we can build these kind of social layers on top, not on top of an individual repository, but on top of the collective contents in all repositories around the world. Of course, this is a very ambitious vision, and we are only at the very beginning of it. But we did come out with technological recommendations in November 2017 related to how repositories, where we feel repositories should be going in terms of their behaviors and functionalities and related technology. And of course, I think very important aspect of this vision is that we're not just looking at the traditional journal article. What we'd like to do is have a system that supports articles, but also supports all the valuable research contributions that should be available. It should be available and recognized. So can we expand our thinking around collection and providing access to more of an ecosystem with a range of different types of content? And just to kind of finish up and conclude, we've been thinking a lot about like what might be the path. How can we get towards this vision around institutions taking a stronger role to providing access? And last year we published kind of 5 prerequisites that we thought were necessary to kind of achieving a more sustainable knowledge commons. Part of that is strengthening our local institution-based services. Another aspect is connecting those local services through regional, national, and global networks. We need to start redistributing our funds, especially in the library communities. We need to think about how can we move our funds from a very narrow way of looking at buying academic journals to supporting a broader range of services and open access and open science services. We need to take a very serious look at how we evaluate and assess research contributions so that they reflect quality, not use journal impact factors as proxy measures. And finally, we need to look at and adopt some principles around the governance of the commons. And I think that's one of the important conversations that we can have, that we need to start having related to the kind of academic-led or academy-owned conversation. And so just to finish off, recently, I guess it was last week, COAR and SPARC together published a set of good practice principles for scholarly communication services. And we really see this as trying to get the conversation started amongst the community, amongst service providers, about how we can support a variety of different models, profit or not-for-profit models, while also ensuring that the services are reflecting the needs of the user community and scholarly and research writ large. So we've identified 7 good practice principles for scholarly communication services. I won't go through them here, but they are available on the COAR and SPARC websites. And with that, I'll say thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kathleen. I think that last slide is a great one in order to put towards the community and you know, maybe this is where commercial and non-commercial publishers can agree on sets of principles and become more trusted members or more trusted partners with the Academy. Of course, I have a vested interest working for a commercial publisher. We have a fantastic lot of questions. We've got just over 10 minutes. Can I just check with the panelists that, could you go over for 5 or 10 minutes?
Yes.
I can.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, so we will, and apologies to those who have to leave on the hour. So I would like to start with one from South America, if I can find it. And by the way, Claire Redhead is the executive director of OASPA, and she's come on board to help field the questions as well and make sure that I don't go off track. So the first one, this is a specific question to Charles about your press. What percentage of, oh, my chat room jumped the wrong question.
I see that one, Catriona. The percentage of HSS journals published by U of M are in open access. It's actually 100%. We don't do any closed access journals.
Thank you. Okay, that was a straightforward one. And there's another one from Simon Baines, which is also to Charles. I was pleased to hear Charles address the recent Radical OA Collective statement, which explains their refusal to engage in this publishing day. I agree entirely with his reflections on this. And what the, oh, it's jumped again, Casey. Too many questions. Fantastic.
And I see that one here, Catriona. Shall I keep going with that one? Because it was very interesting. Yeah, I agree entirely with his reflections on this and what the LPC has said in response on their blog. That said, I don't think the second of their 2 points was raised. They explain that they feel it's important that academic or academy publishing needs to build only on open rather than commercial platforms. Do the panels have views on this? And I think it is for all of us, but I would say that I thought that Catriona's observation that this might be a rather different perspective in the US versus, or North America, or US particularly, is right. I think the middle way here is the sort of approach taken by Ubiquity Press, for example, where they've really thought about how to avoid lock-in, for example. And those COAR and Spark principles, I think, are very powerful in this area. So I think there are definitely good ways to work in a mixed commercial and non-commercial, non-profit environment, and principles and values stated transparently are the key. And I would say one other small thing, which is I think it's often an accident of the tax code as to whether someone is classified as commercial or non-profit. I know, for example, many publishers in the humanities who really are much more non-profit in reality than, but on a commercial tax bracket than we are. So, I mean, I think it's in some cases a meaningless distinction. But I'd be interested in what other panelists feel about this.
Yeah, Kathleen and Paul, would you like to chip into that?
Kathleen, do you want to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think the whole point is that what drives? I think you need to look at the mission of the press. I mean, I agree that open source platforms are a very useful way forward. We produce a lot of open source materials ourselves here in UCL. And it does help to avoid lock-in as you're trying to migrate to new platforms. On the other hand, at any one time, you're going to have to make a decision about the platform that you want to use. We did do that with UCL Press. Some of our platforms are commercial. They come from commercial third parties who are committed to open access and open science principles, and some are born open access. So our repository platform is an open source platform. So we've got a mixed approach, and to be honest, the approach we've taken is best to breed at the time we need it, and that's what we'll go with. If it's open source, that's great, but that isn't. But we wouldn't say. I don't think we'd want to say that only open source, because that would rule out too many good players in the market.
Kathleen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Paul and Charles. I think a mixed environment is healthy, and I think there is a place for profit services in the ecosystem. But the main thing that institutions need to look out for is that they're locked in, or that, you know, their data is being used in ways that they hadn't foreseen, or to kind of manipulate the incentives of the system. So again, I think as long as we can agree on a set of principles around how we see these services being managed and governed, then I think it's fine.
I'd just like to chip in, because I am at a commercial publisher, but we're also developing open source platforms, and we don't agree to lock in, and we make the best data available. And so is the question, I don't think that being commercial is incompatible with these open standards, but I think it's up for the academic community to decide what are the open standards they require, what are the red lines, and then for publishers to meet those standards. But that's my own personal view. Claire, have you spotted a question?
Well, while we're on the subject of platforms, there was a question to Paul, which was, please could you say a little more about the technology platform or platforms underlying UCL Press and the relationship with Science Open?
Yeah, I'm having a bit of difficulty hearing you, Claire, but I think the question was, what's the relationship between UCL Press and the Science Open platform? And also
the tech providers.
Okay, right, okay. Okay, got it. Right, okay, so we as I said, just now we offer a series of platforms. For our research monographs, we have two approaches. And we use our institutional repository, UCL Discovery, as the place for digital curation and long-term archiving of the PDF of the book. And that's where half the downloads come from traffic being directed to UCL Discovery. We place our metadata on a number of other platforms, but we also place a copy of the full text onto the JSTOR platform, and that was as a result of a conversation I had with JSTOR when JSTOR came to see me here in London to ask how could they support open access publishing based in the Academy going forward. And I said, well, you could store a copy of our full text and see whether that increases the download figures, and it has, because it's doubled the download figures overnight. So the two main sources are for the research monographs are from UCL Discovery, our institutional repository, and from having copies on the JSTOR platform. For our journal, for the new mega journal delivery, we did go out to tender for a provider. We looked at open source and commercial offerings, and Science Open came out as best of breed in the procurement process, so that's why the contract was placed with them. We had a model for how we wanted to interact with the academic community, how open we wanted the system to be, and we procured the best system that was the closest fit to our requirements, and that happened to be a commercial system. For the textbooks, the third platform, we're developing our own textbook platform that will be open source once it's fully developed. It was developed with AHRC funding, with collaboration from our Department of Information Studies here in UCL to develop the book platform, book as open online content platform. That will be open source once the development is finished. So it's a mixed approach.
Thanks, Paul. There is actually another question from Andrea Hackner about white label services, but I would like to try and just expand the range of questions we have.
Sure.
And I know that there are at least two questions, one from Rebecca Kennison about the value of green. And so, Paul, I think you mentioned in your talk that you didn't really see that route as publishing, and yet for Kathleen it is fundamental to what Kathleen is doing. And so two sort of both academy-led initiatives, perhaps the panel could discuss more where they see the role of archiving and green fitting in to the sort of publishing and open science service provision by the academy.
Well, I can start with my opinion. So I think green is it's important to have repositories now to assist with the transition towards open access. But our vision, our longer term vision is really that there is no green and gold. So what we, as I presented in my presentation, what we would like to see is that repositories provide access to content, and then there are peer review and other types of evaluation assessment measures built on top of that kind of content in an open and transparent way. So what we're doing is positioning repositories to move beyond the green-gold dichotomy towards, again, decoupling the moving away from the concept of the traditional journal and traditional peer review to providing those kind of peer review services in a more open, distributed environment.
I would just add that you know, green is valuable, very valuable, but I'm not sure it quite fits with the academic-led, academy-led publishing day sort of purpose, which is really about thinking about the whole process of publishing, right from the start of the author's engagement with thinking about publishing, and how we can take a much more values-based, mission-driven approach to that whole workflow, whereas green is really much more about that access at the far end of the process. So I just make that observation. That's why I think it's not coming up so much in our talks.
And Paul, how do you see?
Yes, thanks, Catriona. Well, I'd agree with everything that Kathleen says and everything that Charles has said, actually. I think the UCL approach is driven, as Charles has indicated, by close working with our academic colleagues around the faculties. In some subject areas, green is the perfectly accepted as the authoritative version. So I'm thinking of our physics department, particularly energy physics. Some of our environmental astrophysics colleagues would see green as absolutely all they require, and they're perfectly happy with that as a way of disseminating their outputs. Other colleagues in UCL, I'm a historian, I'm thinking particularly of arts, humanities and social sciences, wouldn't see green as the target for their publication activities, and that's why the UCL Press model has developed in the way that it has, where we include green and more polished as in formatted gold type outputs side by side, because we're trying to meet different sets of expectations from different academic communities. But I'd absolutely agree with Kathleen when she says, well, ultimately, we're not looking for green, we're not looking for gold, we're looking for a new publishing paradigm which is led by the academy. And I think all the approaches that we've heard this afternoon are steps starting from different starting points, but all going to the same objective.
Thank you. Claire, do you have a question?
There's one here which was aimed at everybody. So the question was that university presses and libraries seem obvious parts of the academy, but what, in your view, is the role of scholarly societies in an academic-led world?
That's a great question.
Okay, I'll have a start if you like. So, of course, learned societies are collections of academics bonded together with a shared purpose and vision. I have spoken to learned societies here in this office, the one you see on your screen, who have big commercial publishing activities, trying to get them to engage in open science and to change their publishing model into a more open access, open science model. Some of the journals that UCL Press has taken on board come from learned societies. The Sylvia Townsend Warner Society, for example, is a very specialized arts and humanities learned society, and they asked us, would we be their publisher and publish their journal? So yes, we do that. Learned societies can set up their own publishing activities using a UCL Press type model, in my opinion, or they can use our white label services and we will be their publisher. So learned societies do have a role. They just need to, with respect, stop being nervous about making change and take that leap forward to decide what kind of model, of the several models we've heard about this afternoon in the call, which model best suits them and which they want to go down, which route they want to go down. Because doing nothing and hoping it will all go away, and many learned societies have responded to Plan S like that, I hope it will go away, I don't want to engage with it. That's not a solution. That's simply putting off the inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly lots of issues that learned societies face to do with revenue and how they cross-subsidize activities and so on, which are huge issues. I would make one observation about the idea of partnerships between learned societies and universities, and I know this is something Rebecca has worked on. I know as an institution, we're very interested in partnering with learned societies and supporting their publishing needs, infrastructure, etc. It's probably going to be more infrastructure support than cash support, but it is support. But one of the issues we run into quite a lot is a concern on governance boards drawn from multiple different institutions about the optics of partnering with one institution. And I think that's something that learned societies may need to get over if we're to really collaborate effectively.
Kathleen.
No, I agree with both Paul and Charles, and I think developing and strengthening local institutional services and partnering with learned societies is a way to help them transition towards open access.
Okay, I think we'll have two more questions, and then we'll have to shut off because people will have to go, including our panelists. I've got one from Barbara Ford, who points to actually Kathleen's point about the focus on the APC model. And it's more about the consortium model. She says, if I heard correctly, Charles has 250 institutions supporting his community of 4,000. So does he have any plans to sustain the support even when these 250 can no longer contribute? So what is the way forward for these types of consortium models, and are they sustainable? And that would be lovely to hear from all the panelists.
Can I just clarify my point there, though, which is I was taking the sort of rough number of higher education institutions in the US, which is about 4,300, and noting that of those, if you look at the sort of groups, the institutions in groups that are talking about these kind of consortial approaches, you probably only have about 250 of those 4,300 really engaged in those conversations. So the trick is, how do we get more of those institutions that are sitting on the fence to engage in this conversation. I think there's some really interesting work now looking at how to do that, and I had one mentioned at the bottom of my slide, which is the Mapping the Scholarly Communication Infrastructure project, just funded by the Mellon Foundation, and I think that's interesting. But there's other very interesting work. Rebecca Kennison herself has done some interesting work, but it's a big problem. How do we get more institutions to the table where this is not an obviously beneficial thing for just them? It's about the public good and the good of the whole system. It's a complicated question, but it has to happen.
Yeah, it's a collective action problem. Kathleen and Paul.
I think I've been trying to encourage the library associations to take some leadership in this area in terms of defining what the future role of institutions should be in supporting these types of activities and services. So I think if we can establish that this is a good practice operations for libraries to be part of these kind of activities, like we have done with cataloging and all the other different operations in libraries, it might take us a step forward in terms of having more widespread support and engagement and participation by the institutions.
Paul, do you have a...
Yes, thanks, Catriona. I think if you looked at European, well, certainly the research-led universities in Europe, which are the, if I can say this, are the ones that I know best, because I tend to deal with them more frequently. I have explained the UCL Press model as an exemplar of a European approach to the future of publishing to a number of research-led universities across the continent. The first response is, oh, this is going to cost us money, and we're already having to pay for subscriptions and for article processing charges where they will pay APC. So you're just adding another layer of cost to the library budget. 3 years later, because I've been doing this for 3 years, the perception in libraries I think has changed, because libraries are now saying, what do I need to do in order to develop a publishing service along the lines of being open science compliant? And we note that Plan S allows alternative publishing platforms to be compliant with funder requirements. So a piece of work I'm doing, because I've been requested to do this by a number of European rectors of these universities, is to try and draw up how you scale up UCL Press as a model to be a pan-European model, how other universities, particularly the research-intensive ones who are producing lots of research, how they might use some of the services or the models that we've developed to develop a pan-European infrastructure for alternative platforms for open access publishing. And I think over the last 3 years that it has changed from this isn't a role for the university or for the library in the university, it's too expensive. They see the benefits that open access publishing brings, particularly from alternative publishing platforms, and they say, what do we need to change in order to enjoy these benefits? So that's a change of perception and the beginnings of a change in culture for universities to become producers of knowledge rather than simply storers of knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Cultural change is the big issue. Just for the 89 participants who are here, we will be having a webinar in this Open Science series on the consortial model of publishing with fantastic lineup of speakers just like today, some of which I'm sure you can guess, and we don't have a date, but we will do it. So Claire, for the last question.
I was wondering actually if I could ask how, it's interesting, Paul, you talking about a pan-European and the more joined up approach in Europe, how we could have more alignment globally in academy-led publishing.
Okay, you asked the most difficult question right at the end. Okay, I'll start, but I'm not sure I have a tremendously insightful answer. I have read the America statement on Plan S, and I was trying to explain the America statement from the Global South to colleagues in the UK earlier this morning, and the America statement is actually that Plan S is too European, it's too global north, it's trying to dictate to the rest of the world what the model should be, and that's unacceptable. I don't think that was the intention of Plan S, but I think America is right in pointing this out, that there was no engagement with the Global South before Plan S was issued, and that's a mistake. So, to answer your question, how do we get this global engagement with alternative publishing platforms? We need a forum or some kind, maybe OASPA is the forum which to bring parties together so that we can have these global conversations, the kinds of conversations that America was saying didn't happen about version 1 of Plan S. We mustn't make the same mistake. I think if OASPA were willing to take that role, that would be a fantastic opportunity to bring interested parties together to see how we can align our missions, our visions, the infrastructures that we use, and get some kind of join-up in delivering a viable alternative to commercial and particularly APC-based publishing.
Yeah, and I mean, representing a pretty international community at COAR, I think one of the things that I've learned is that there are a lot of very innovative services, publishers, initiatives already happening in the Global South because they've had to come up for a long time with solutions to address the issues of the high cost of subscriptions. Sure. So there's a lot that we can learn from countries in the Global South. So I completely agree with you, Paul. It's very important to have those conversations, and they can't just be north to south. They have to be conversations that go in both directions as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I have nothing to add. Absolutely.
Oh, I know. I wish we could get Dominic Babini to speak and give her view, but she's muted, unfortunately. And so with that, I would like to thank all the participants. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, the panelists and also the participants for hanging on so long. I know we're late. We're still trying to get the format of this webinar right. We might have to actually extend the time a little bit to get both the sufficiently meaty presentations and the questions. Thank you again, all of you, and to Copyright Clearance, and of course to OASPA for organising these in the first place. Thanks everyone, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Just let me remind you that these the slides and the recordings will be all available on the OASPA website. You won't get to see the videos, but that's the only thing. But everything else, and it's all publicly available. And so please spread the word and make sure that others get this information. It's fantastic. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.